When I ask you who you are, the first thing you probably say is your name, given to you by your parents, not something that you chose on your own. But when I ask you, no, who are you, on a deeper scale, that's where sometimes people can have self-confliction on that. Because when you really think that deep, who actually am I? That's where things can get a little tricky. So, firstly, what made you the way you are? So, your past experiences, how you grew up, where you grew up, things like that um, can push you towards a direction on how you yourself are going to act in certain situations because you were, you know, brought up that way. But it's also, physically, that can be, you know, mostly off your parents' genetics, right? So for me, I was like 100% gonna have broader shoulders, just be a bigger guy in general. Um, you know, a hairy individual, right? High test, you might say. Um, so maybe that's your physical attributes. But what about your personality, right? The sense of you, that's where the confusion can come in. And it's really interesting to think about because the way you think, the way you see the world is different from every single person. So the way I would see a situation is going to be different from you because of how I was brought up or how my personality is or things like that. But when you think of you, nobody can relate to you 100%, right? And I think that's very interesting to think about um, because you can look at it from two sides of the same coin where it's really cool, like, man, I'm my own person, and nobody can tell me how to live my life. But it also could be a haunting thing for where like nobody knows how I feel, right? At the end of the day, we all have a general sense of what each other feel, um, because we're all humans at the end of the day. The main principles are still there of how we can connect. Um, but it's like the little details, right? So, uh, for it's different for every person of even like internal dialogue. Like some people um, have a different voice in their head, or it's themselves speaking, or they can't hear anything at all, right? Or like just thinking through a process. Some people can't hear like an actual dialogue in their head. I do. I hear myself speak, but I think that's interesting that people can have a different view on that. Um, Also, when it comes to imagining things, there are people who can literally not imagine anything in their head, or if they try and picture something in their head and they're like me, they can make out the picture in their head, but it's fuzzy. There's not very many details to it. And then there's people who can see it very clearly and have a vivid imagination in their head. Um, and then if you're like me, you can, fantasize about fake scenarios in your head for 30 minutes that aren't real and have like this emotional attachment to it in the moment. And you snap out of it and you're like, my gosh, what am I doing? Like that wasn't even real. So people's minds, the way they act on a day-to-day basis is different. So it's just, that's very interesting to me. And I love asking people about that because it's not something we often think about. But it is very different from person to person with those things. But I will say, personality wise, that is to each their own, right? You can't you can categorize people, but you'll never be exact on just who a person is, right? Nobody's that um, consistent, if that makes sense. No one's that predictable. We're all different. Um, and I think that's really cool because it makes you your own person. Um, but yeah, um, which I think that kind of makes it hard sometimes to connect with some people because they might see things so much more differently than you do, or have a different mindset, or a different way they were raised. Um, but at the end of the day, you can cross that barrier and connect with that person, even if it's on, it doesn't even have to be a deep level, but you can still connect with them on, you know, surface level. Um, so I'm not saying those are like a barrier to connect or socialize, but it is something as you continue to talk to people that can pay, you'll start noticing in conversations. Because I have a friend who's like very, very, very invested in his future and making sure everything's right, and he's so invested on providing for his family and to make them proud. Like that is huge for him, right? But with my family, of course I want that as well as a man. But with how I was raised, it was, it's very much more laid back, like, oh, just trust God, go with the plan, or go with the flow, go with his plan, I guess is the right wording. Um, and just more laid back, right? So my friend would always be very invested in his grades, where he worked, how his resume looked. But for me, it was always like, just get through this year, seize to get degrees. It's like wherever you want to work, apply there. It was never like you need to do this and this, right? Um, but one thing that was different from me to him is like religion as well. For him, it was like his parents both had different beliefs, but they never really pushed that or explained to him what they believed. Um, while with my family, it was a way bigger deal, and both my parents were on the same page of their faith in Christianity, which ultimately rubbed off on me as the years have gone by, and I've definitely moved into my faith more firmly as time goes on. And again, that seed wouldn't be planted if my parents didn't, take me to church or get invested in the church some way with the middle school and high school youth groups and things like that, which ultimately made me who I am today, right? Your experiences and what you've experienced have molded you and shaped you different than everyone else. And they don't even have to be negative. They can be positive too. But I think as a man, to have bad things happen to you, it sounds bad from an outside perspective, but that is a huge thing when it comes to maturing as a man. If I didn't have any hard times, let's be honest, I'd be lazy and I'd have nothing going for me. But these hard times make you not necessarily harder, but they make you grow and understand how to attack that better. Um, because let's face it, if I had no problems and nothing bad ever happened, I would never grow and I'd be in this state of comfort and probably be fat and never learn anything or have any self-respect or see any value in anything, right? That's why we have highs and lows. If it was only highs, then there'd be no value in anything. But if it was constant lows, there would be no hope in anything higher. That's why we have highs and lows. Does that make sense? And again, that's how, we're shaped. So, um, to be completely honest, I've had a very easy life. Uh, Basically when I was born, I have zero to complain about, right? And I would say, not to throw anybody under the bus here, or assume, but I'm gonna assume, but like, no offense, right? I don't know everyone's story, but I will say, I think majority of people that are in the middle class that are in the U.S., I think it's safe to say we've all had a pretty easy life, right? When we're looking around the rest of the world, um, it's very easy to be ungrateful with what we have, and not realize how bad it would be if we didn't have these things and we live very comfortable lives. So again, going back to that, my experience would be way different, um, and my past is very different from someone who lives across the world from me, right? There's definitely some similarities, right? We're all human, and if they're around my age, of course we're going to connect. But again, your past shapes you, the way you were raised shapes you. But that doesn't mean it, like, has to change you just because you grew up a certain way. So, you can't use that as an excuse or a fallback, right? I can't be like, oh, I grew up poor, so, that trauma made me kill somebody. Like, you can't do that. But I'm saying in the little things, they do have an impact over time, right? If I grew up in a traumatic, abusive household, obviously that's going to have some effects on me with probably being more introverted, right, and have trust issues because of that, obviously. But you can change that over time, um, and it doesn't have to stay like that. Um, because I've found that I go through different phases of being very social or not social at all, right? And I go back and forth all the time. And again, that's just a personality thing. That makes you you. So that's my case on it. Because every person is driven by different things. Everyone has a different idea of success, um, or what satisfies them, or well, I guess we can all agree on morals, but how we would attack certain decisions or things like that. So, and that's the beauty of it. We have free will. Um, Even though God has a path for us, we still have free will to make our own decisions. Um, but if you trust in Him, you're going to follow His path, even if you have free will. So, that's all I have for this video.